In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about creating master detail forms. And the user was kind enough to send me this little screenshot right here of what they had in mind. And the basic premise here is that we have one section that contains information that we're going to want to import once, and then this block, which contains information that we may want to repeat over. And so I've built a form that does this in RackForms here, and basically in RackForms we have several different ways of doing this. The way that we're going to look at here is by using the bucket repeater function. Though there are other methods of doing this, and even within the bucket repeater, there's two different ways of doing it. There's hand coding, and then there's automatic using the SQL Plus automator. And so I want to take a look at both of those. So first things first then, as far as this form goes, the version that we have right here is of course a very simplified version. I've just taken the name and address fields, and then for the repeating block, I have city and price. To drive these two guys into the database, I have two SQL Plus items. The first SQL Plus item is inserting into a table called B1, and you notice it's inserting the name and address fields right here. And name and address, when we look at the database, are simply name and address columns right here. Now, as part of this, we have an auto increment field right here. And this auto increment field then, and this is very important, is actually being returned by the set last insert ID equals retval. In other words, when I have this box checked right here, RackForms is going to run our database query, and it's actually going to return whatever this auto increment value is to a PHP variable called retval. And then we can actually use retval as a standard PHP token in RackForms to insert that value. And that's exactly what we do right here. So in the second SQL Plus item, we're going to insert into B1 bucket, and B1 bucket, as we can see now, has our city and price columns. So here's city and price. In addition to that, though, we want to include our B1 foreign key right here via this retval value. Now I know it's kind of a mouthful, so let me just take a step back here and kind of cover that once again. When I run this first query right here, it's going to insert a row into B1, and because my database has this set up as an auto increment field, so it's a primary key and it's auto increment right here, whenever a row is inserted into the database, it's automatically going to grab the next highest value, the next increment, and it's going to return that to me. And so that's what we return in this retval value right here. I then use retval in the form of a token right here, this $retval, right here to say, when I insert into B1 bucket, I want to take whatever ID this guy was and insert it as the B1 ID column for B1 bucket. Therefore, when I'm inserting rows, I can look at B1 ID right here, and when I see a number 5, I can simply look at the B1 table and see that that was this user that owns those rows. Also, I can look at BID1 right here and see that that's this user that owns those. So in other words, I can now create an SQL join later on, and I can join these two tables up together. Other than that then, it's actually pretty standard as far as the SQL is concerned. I put that retval value in, and then I simply grab city and price. However, there's one other special thing that we're doing here. Because this is a bucket repeater, we do actually need to go down to bucket repeater processing mode and set this to one of these two values. One row per duplicated item, or one row per duplicated item plus the original item. Most of the time, I actually choose this guy because I want the original item to be inserted along with the duplicated items. That doesn't mean that we have to do it that way, but usually I find it a little bit cleaner. Then I also have to set process this bucket to whatever bucket that we're actually processing. Now in this form, there's only one bucket, so I only have one choice. But if we had multiple buckets, this select item will populate with those values. The end result then is I can click save right here, and when I run this form, I can go ahead and put in some values. And I already had one duplicated value right here, but we'll put in a second one. We'll say 108. Let's go ahead and add one more row. We'll say New York, and we'll put in 189, and I'll hit submit. So now we go to our submission page, and again, two things have happened. This first SQL Plus item has been run, and if I refresh my database, you'll see that that row was put in. You notice the ID is 6, so indeed if I look at B1 bucket now, I should have 3 rows that were inserted, which I do. All of them have a B1 ID of 6, and you can see that my 3 cities were put in right here. So that's the basic concept if I was going to hand code this. But that's not to say that I have to hand code this at all. Let me go ahead and create auto2 here. In other words, a copy of this form. Let me delete these 2 guys right here. Now let me actually just run, instead of doing all that work, let me just run the SQL Plus Automator and run that against RackForms, my database. For table name, I'm going to say B2, because I don't believe B2 exists in here. It doesn't. And then I'm going to say table and add SQL Plus insert item. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I get a little notice right here that says we must drag the bucket insert item below the parent one. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to find my bucket item. I'm going to make sure I drag that below. This guy has to run first, in other words. And now, without having to do any of that coding, it's actually set up all that logic for us. And we can actually see that by looking at the code. So in the first insert, I've created a table called B2. It's going to name an address. And then for the second one, it's putting in the foreign key, a city, and a price. And again, it's doing that same thing. It's grabbing the ret val, and it's doing all that logic for us. And so now if I run this form, in theory here, I should have the same basic functionality that I did in the last one. I can repeat this. And when I submit, it's going to go to my submission page, and I should be able to look at my B2 tables, which by the way, RackForms created for us. You can see here now that once again, I have that same basic logic set up. So 2 different ways to do that. Obviously one is fully automated. We do have to make sure we drag the field down, but the other one is doing it by hand coding. Now there's one other advantage to the fully automated version. You may notice that we actually put in a little entry time column right here so that whenever we insert a record, we actually get a timestamp on that as well. Not that it's hard to set up on your end, but it's nice that RackForms actually does that for us. So that's basically it then. I do want to say that this functionality right here, that is the ability to process bucket repeaters, is new as of November 1st, 2014. So if you have an older version of RackForms, say before build 836, you're actually going to need to update before you get that functionality. Provided you do though, like I say, it should be pretty easy to go ahead, right click, and create that functionality. Of course, as I said in the beginning of the video, there are other ways of handling this master detail type situation and logic. One of the more popular ways, and one of the ways that I employ often, is I will actually use embedded builder pages. So I actually build a form, I'll build a builder page that allows me to insert and delete records, and I'll embed the builder page into my form page. However, probably the main reason I did that is because I didn't actually have the SQL Plus Automator method available to us. Now that we do though, this is probably a little bit easier and faster to do jobs this way now. Alas, of course, if you have any questions about this or anything you see on RackForms or RackForms.com, please let us know at info@rackforms.com. And thanks for watching.